Progress report on Turkey for 2013. I would like to, first of all, ask Minister Kukulas to take the floor on this point. Thank you. Honourable members, on behalf of the Presidency, I would like to thank Council and in particular Mrs. Oomen-Ruijten for her work. The resolution does underline a series of points and concerns that are significant and arrives at a very particular moment in time for the relations between the European Union and Turkey. Council reaffirms the importance given to the relations between the EU and Turkey, and Turkey is, for the European Union, a candidate country and an important partner with a very dynamic economy. So these active and trustworthy negotiations, accession negotiations, based on the usual conditionalities, will offer to this relationship with Turkey the opportunity to reach cruising level. And that is why we would like to welcome the regional policy and coordination of regional mediums, that chapter which was opened last year. The European Union should remain as the catalyst for developments in Turkey as far as the rule of law is concerned and fundamental rights and liberties. The Council is continuing to help Turkey with its reforms and make sure that the necessary safety valves for equilibrium are present in order to have the rule of law, justice, respect of human lives, equality, and that should include the rights of those who belong to national minorities. Implementing these reforms based on the European criteria is a key issue. In this case, Council takes positive note the emerging and active civil society in Turkey, which must be supported, and it is a very important factor at play in this case. We also welcome other important positive developments, amongst which I can mention the creation and operation of bodies such as the Ombudsman, the National Authority on Human Rights, and also measures that have been adopted in the area of women's rights and the equality between men and women. However, more efforts are necessary, in particular as far as the respect of fundamental rights and liberties are concerned in Turkey, both as far as the legislation is concerned and also in practice. And here I'd like to include freedom of expression, freedom of meeting, religious freedoms, and also the freedom to use your assets. The exaggerated use of violence by police authorities against demonstrations should be duly examined and controlled. You should not restrict the freedom of the press, and there were many prosecutions against journalists and against writers, against members of academia and those who defend human rights. There are frequent and disproportionate prohibitions of websites, and there's been a broad implementation of laws on organized crime and terrorism. All these are issues that cause great concern. Allow me to underscore that the issues that create concern to the European Union have been put to the Prime Minister of Turkey, Mr. Erdogan, when he met Presidents Schulz, Van Rompuy and Barroso when he visited Brussels on the 20th of January. Presidents Barroso and Van Rompuy made mention of recent events in Turkey and gave a clear message and coherent message to Prime Minister Erdogan on the concerns of the European Union, on the principle of the separation of powers, on the impartiality of the judicial, and also on the need to have a functional and operational judicial police. So in these meetings, we underlined that Turkey, as a candidate country, has subscribed to political criteria for accession, and it is important not to backtrack and backpedal and make sure that the judicial authorities are able to function impartially, without preference, in a transparent and impartial way. We expect of Turkey to make efforts in order to guarantee that it fully fulfills the Copenhagen criteria. The fulfillment of these criteria, apart from the fact that it is a sine qua non condition for this procedure, will be to the benefit of Turkey, and it will satisfy the expectations of its citizens. I would like now to mention briefly what happens in the relations between the EU and Turkey in other sectors. First of all, we welcomed the readmission treaty signature last year, and we expect its full implementation towards all member states by Turkey. Progress in the visa regime does depend on the performance of Turkey in that area, and will depend on the correct and close implementation, as far as the European Union and its member states are concerned, of the prerequisites which are part of the roadmap as it was agreed by Council. Given the fact that Turkey is one of the key transit countries for illegal immigration towards Europe and the European Union, the correct implementation of bilateral agreements on readmission and all the relevant clauses is still a priority. In this context, the adoption of the law on foreigners and international protection is a great step forward in the area of immigration and asylum. Honourable members, based on the negotiating framework and the previous conclusions of the European Council, Turkey must commit unequivocally to keeping to its good neighbourly relations with neighbouring countries, and everything that it is signed as part of its UN commitments. So we expect of Turkey to avoid any threat against any member state and any source of tension or action which could possibly harm this good neighbourly relationship and all I have described before. We must respect the sovereign rights of member states, and this includes bilateral agreements and also the exploitation of their energy sources and other resources, and here we should include the Treaty on International Maritime Law. Council has underlined the need to reaffirm the sovereignty of member states on their waters, and we deeply regret the fact that Turkey, in spite of its signature, is not implementing the additional protocol to its accession agreement and not in an equal way towards all member states, because doing so would boost its negotiating process. A more positive point is the fact that we welcome the fact that talks have been reinitiated on a viable and peaceful solution to the conflict of Cyprus within the context of the UN and taking into account the Security Council resolutions and based on the principles which rule our European Union. So we would like Turkey to support, and we expect of Turkey that it will support actively these negotiations and will express its commitment on an overall settlement which is of the most important significance. Thank you, Minister.
The floor is yours.
Madam President, honourable members, President and Minister, what a pleasure to see you in this position. I would first of all like to thank Ms. Oomen-Ruijten for the high quality of the report and for her continuous contribution to the European Union-Turkey relations as rapporteur of this House over the past 7 years. What a pleasure to work together with you, Madam. European Union-Turkey relations are based on a number of strategic foundations. The accession process is certainly the central one, but others are growing in significance, notably our dialogue and cooperation on foreign policy, our trade relations, our cooperation on mobility and migration, and our dialogue on energy issues. These are other aspects that make Turkey such a special country for the European Union. Over the past year, there have been positive developments, but also reasons for serious concerns. On the positive side, we have opened the accession negotiations on the regional policy chapter, the first chapter opened in more than 3 years. We signed the readmission agreement and launched visa liberalisation dialogue. We have also launched the evaluation of the customs union to assess its strengths and weaknesses in order to benefit more from our long-standing trade relations. I understand that the report prepared by the World Bank will be presented to the INTA Committee of the European Parliament on the 20th of March. The European Union and Turkey continue to engage in an intensive dialogue on foreign policy issues. Last but not least, Turkey also played a key role in the resumption of the Cyprus settlement talks. Unfortunately, as I said, there have also been reasons for serious concerns. They relate first and foremost to the government's response to the recent corruption allegations, in particular the adoption of legislation which affects the functioning of the judiciary and freedom of expression. I have expressed my concerns publicly but also directly to my Turkish counterparts, including Foreign Affairs Minister Davutoglu and European Union Affairs Minister Çavuşoğlu. We will report extensively on these developments, also in our forthcoming progress report in October. I intend to continue and even deepen a resolute, patient and frank engagement with Turkey on the rule of law and fundamental freedoms. But in addition, we need to change the way we cooperate in order to ensure that the development in the different policy areas goes into the right direction. We need, for instance, to work more closely together before legislation is envisaged and drafted. The Commission will approach our Turkish counterparts on this basis in the coming weeks to ensure that we have common understanding on the principles of our cooperation. This is the only way for the European Union to remain an anchor of reforms in Turkey and to support all those in this country who call for more freedom and democracy. In the meantime, I will continue to urge the Council to formulate at last a roadmap, or if you would prefer, opening benchmarks for Chapter 23 of the accession negotiation. This is what Turkey itself asked for, so let's take their word for it and let's engage in a constructive dialogue to deliver results on these crucial issues. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Füle. And now on behalf of the PPE, Madam Oomen-Ruijten.
Ja, dank u, mevrouw.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, thank you. I'm very grateful for all the compliments I've received, but I didn't do this report by myself. I did it together with my colleagues, and I have always tried to ensure that the Parliament's progress report debate represented a platform for open dialogue with Turkey to have a critical but fair and honest report. So that is what we have tried to do, Madam, and I hope that we have succeeded in the case of this latest report. It is important, of course, that the EU should have good relations with Turkey. Quite simply because Turkey is a strategic partner for us in a region which is so turbulent, as we know. In 2005, Turkey committed itself to reforms. And it didn't have to carry out these reforms for us. It had to do so on behalf of its own citizens. And reforms have taken place in the past few years. But I am now concerned, as is the Commissioner and the Minister. This began with the events surrounding the Gezi Park protests. And now there's been the death of a 15-year-old who has been hit by a tear gas grenade. And on behalf of all of us here, I would like to express our condolences to his family. But it wasn't just the Gezi Park events, but recent developments as well, which are cause for concern following the 17th of December. And in our reports, we are really quite critical of these recent developments because what we are taking as our basis, which is Turkey's own commitment that it entered into with us, is that, that Turkey has the rule of law. And part and parcel of that is having an independent and impartial judiciary. And we can't allow there to be no separation of powers. So protection of fundamental freedoms, protection of the judiciary, protection of the freedom of expression, this is what is at stake at the moment. Because when it comes to the protection of these important things, and we assumed until December that reforms were being undertaken to guarantee that impartiality and independence of the judiciary. As I say, we now have deep concerns. So what we now want to see is a serious, constructive dialogue with Turkey on the subject, not just on acts that have already been passed, but also for the future. We, as Europeans, stand for values and principles which are also good for Turkish citizens.
Ms. Oomen-Ruijten, on behalf of the S&D, colleague Obiols.
Gracias. Thank you, Madam. I'd like firstly, as shadow on this report, to say that I'm happy with the way the negotiations went and with the agreement that has emerged from them. This is, I think, a balanced report. It's a positive one. It makes suggestions as regards the way that we would like Turkey to go in the future and the way that the relations between the European Union and Turkey might develop. But of course I can't express the same satisfaction when I look at the situation in Turkey itself. The year covered by this report cannot be positively assessed. For example, in the Gezi Park there were demonstrations by civil society which were severely repressed. Today we heard of the death of Becky Leban, who was a teenager who died after 9 months of illness. And I think that simply confirms our desire that such events should not occur again in this country. We've seen this government in difficult positions. A number of ministers have been removed as a result of scandals. There are continuing problems facing workers in the media. In general, there is uncertainty about a future which in the short term will probably be decisive. What happens in the next few months, including the municipal and presidential elections, will determine the future, but I personally cannot forecast that future. So I think it's better to stick to the precautionary principle, to confirm our agreements and our commitments, to encourage a good relationship and to express clear, frank criticisms on the basis of facts, not opinions. That's what this Parliament should be doing in its report.
I would like to urge you all to respect your time. And now I will ask colleague Lambsdorff on behalf of the ALDE to take the floor.
Ja, vielen Dank, Frau Präsidentin.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Turkey is an important neighbour. It is a big and proud country, and many Turks live in the European Union. In this whole debate about accession, the question of religion has never played a role for us Liberals, and I'm delighted that is the case, and I'd like to thank Ria Oomen-Ruijten, the rapporteur, for ensuring that throughout this work and in our cooperation, it's the political side that has been to the fore. I think that's excellent. Thank you very much, Ria, for the excellent cooperation. Now, what is important to us are freedoms, and freedoms are precisely what are at risk in Turkey. Press freedom, for example. There are many journalists in prison. There are more there in prison than in China or Iran. And online, the Prime Minister is now threatening closing down Facebook or Twitter because there are things being said that he doesn't like. Now, you might say it was crazy, but YouTube has already been closed down for a period in Turkey. And if we look at the way civil society is being curtailed with ever more prescriptions, and it makes life much more difficult for people, and that's not right. The independence of the judiciary and the freedom of judges to be able to decide what is right and what is wrong is being constrained, and there were many thousands of people deported, and it was only when much later that this was tackled. Now, this whole development, as in the case of stasis in political reform, is worrying, and we have to work with Turkey on this. I've said this before, because it is an important and a proud country. We have to work with them on energy, we have to work with them on foreign policy, and it is admirable what the Turkey has done for the Syrian refugees. But the accession process that we kicked off in 2005, that simply can't get off the blocks, because the relations between the EU and the Turkey have actually got worse rather than better, rather strangely. So this accession process needs to be deferred until such a point that Turkey clears up its act and the citizens have their freedoms respected. Thank you very much.
Colleague Lambsdorff, the Earl of Dartmouth would like to raise your question. Do you take the question? Mr. Dartmouth.
Thank you for taking the question. Mr. Lambsdorff, you mentioned the word freedoms in your speech. Now, should Turkey obtain freedom of movement, what is your careful estimate of the number of Turkish citizens who will emigrate from Turkey to Northern Europe, in particular to Germany and the UK? And to help you with your response, it is estimated that the population of Turkey in 2025 will be 90 million.
Thank you.
Ja, vielen Dank.
Thank you very much, colleague. I've got some bad news for you. My crystal ball unfortunately got left at home today, and I'm not able to give you any numbers on how many Turks in 2025 will express a wish to relocate to Northern Europe. That's not the decisive point. Now, what we can do, quite practically speaking, is make sure that travel conditions for businessmen, students, academics are improved. The visa procedure needs to be changed. Many are turned away from the consulates in Ankara and other places, and we can do that to help civil society and people in Turkey, and then the accession negotiations can be put off until such a point that the government gets its act together. But that's not to say that people are not welcome and we're not thinking about them.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lambsdorff. Η συνάδελφος Keller από τους Πρασίνους.
Recent events around the corruption scandal make once more clear how important it is to have a credible accession process. Because if member states would not always outright reject Turkey's accession no matter what, then we would have much more of a leverage. If we would not have started the negotiations necessarily with things around the single market, with war, with human rights, with fundamental rights, with justice, we wouldn't have had the same problems now around the independence of justice. And we simply can't threaten to stop a negotiation process which is not de facto happening. But instead of being strong and clear on human rights, we have been starting to export our own human rights problems into Turkey, like we're doing now with the readmission agreement. We all know that the rights of migrants will not be respected in Turkey, therefore we should not have a readmission agreement. whereas we agree that visa liberalisation is a very important tool. And yes, there have been important democratic reforms in the past year, but they've been overshadowed by declarations on internet freedom and by the violence against protesters in the Gezi Park. And I too want to remind us of 15-year-old Berkin Elvan, who died because of injuries caused by tear gas bullets. I'm also concerned by attacks on offices of the People's Democratic Party, Halkların Demokrasi Partisi. And I hope that this will not prevent the coming elections from being peaceful and free of attack. And furthermore, any progress is overshadowed by the current corruption scandal and developments that I can only interpret as a threat to the independence of the justice system. But again, the role of the EU could be much stronger if we would have a clear commitment to a positive outcome of a membership perspective. We would have much stronger leverage if we would be clear that yes, we will accept Turkey in our midst if Turkey fulfills the Copenhagen criteria. This is the only thing that counts, and member states should finally be clear about this. Thank you.
Thank you. Now for the ECR, I call Mr. Van Orden for a minute and a half.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Well, with municipal elections at the end of this month and presidential elections later this year, and given the crises all around the region, obviously this is a crucial year for Turkey and indeed for Turkey's relationship with the European Union. We have to ask, what signals do we want to send? Can I say first of all that many of us want to see major changes in the nature of the European Union itself. In particular, we want to get away from the obsession with political integration. Instead, our citizens want to focus on economic growth and improved international competitiveness. They are concerned about free movement as an unqualified right, and in these dangerous and unstable times, they prefer the guarantee of NATO rather than the theatricals of EU defence policy. And it's in this context that we should view our relationship with Turkey. It's very much in our interest to do all we can to ensure that Turkey continues as a stable, increasingly prosperous, free market, secular democracy, firmly oriented to the West and a strong NATO ally. How much easier for Turkey, therefore, if the EU is a rather looser structure, focused on the single market? How much easier for our own citizens to accept Turkey if the free movement issue is properly addressed, including with a long transition period? And on this basis, let us send positive signals to Turkey, open the energy chapter, give fresh vitality to negotiations, provide increased humanitarian assistance to the refugees in Turkey's border areas, and encourage the talks on the reunification of Cyprus, recognising that this is a genuinely two-sided issue which would be helped by substantive confidence-building measures from both Greeks and Turks. And I hope that the Greek presidency of the Council could be more helpful in this particular area. Thank you.
There is a blue card for you, please.
Jeffrey, könnten Sie sich mit folgendem Vorschlag...
Could you agree with the following proposal? We will make the EU a more flexible structure, where, for example, the UK would have a loose relationship with countries that cling to the integration that you worry about, and Turkey would join in the same sort of footing as the UK in a sort of two-speed style Europe. Turkey would be on the same footing as the UK in its relationship with the EU, and I think then everybody would be happy because the ones who want to move ahead further can do so. Would that be a proposal that you could accept?
Micro.
I think you're absolutely right. I think this is exactly the sort of formulation that people in our country would like to see. I don't like the concept of a two-speed Europe, because faster sounds better than slower. What I would prefer is a multi-centric Europe, overlapping circles of engagement, more a la carte Europe, if you like, still with the United Kingdom remaining at the centre, at the core of the European Union, but not engaging in many of these areas where you want increased integration. And I think on that basis it would be so much easier for Turkey to become a member.
Thank you. Now, on behalf of the GUE group, I call Mr. Hajjigil for a minute and a half.
Thank you. It's always a challenge to take to the floor after Mr. Van Orden, who is perhaps the most able ambassador of Turkey to the EP. To the contrary, we feel that events in Turkey should be of concern to us because, you know, these conflicts happening in Turkey today should not make Turkish society backtrack, and we need to see that reforms and the reform process in Turkey right now does not do away with the weakest citizens and will not send them back to a kind of Labour Middle Ages. So these are our proposals, and we should be objective in the way we see the country and its commitments. I'd like to congratulate the rapporteur, and I know there is of course room for improvement. For us it would be unreasonable to press to open chapters 15, 23 and 24 as Turkey insists on not implementing its implementing the protocol which it has already signed as far as the Republic of Cyprus is concerned, and not recognizing its sovereign rights. So the power of the might is right is of course what brought Turkey to Cyprus. However, we here support the reinitiation of talks in Cyprus, and we would like to bring them to a conclusion because we are the ones that live under the stress of occupation and division. So we expect of the international community and the European Union to show solidarity and give us the solution, which is a bi-communal, bi-zonal island, and which will allow us as a people to live on an indivisible island in a demilitarized island. 10 seconds more. Trust-building measures by Turkey, that's what we need, and we shouldn't allow for direct trade with the occupied part. Resolution 550 on Famagusta and the port, and the of course putting a stop to illegal colonization of the island is what we're asking for.
Thank you. Now for the EFD group, Mr. Salavrakos for a minute and a half.
Thank you, sir. I too would like to support the Oomen-Ruijten report, which is a continuation of previous reports and presents a situation in the country, and I think it is a total, and it's a continuation of the previous reports, especially in the parts that do not contradict the previous ones. Definitely, Turkey is a very important country in the Middle East. However, it is still very far away from European standards and values. As is rightly pointed out by the rapporteur in her report, the situation in Turkey is very worrying. We have scandals, corruption, there is a problem with fundamental rights as well as the division of powers. We have a recent example with censorship of the internet as well as more powers for the Secret Service. Turkey does not sign international agreements such as the UN clause. For the 8th consecutive year they do not apply the association agreement with the EU and its additional protocol. They refuse to recognize a member state of the EU. There is still a threat of a casus belli against Greece. They still violate our territorial waters, and they do not respect the rights of member states. All of these details are telling. I would just like to mention that in 2013 the EU has given 900 million euros of pre-accession aid to Turkey. I think that for once we should turn to the problems of the EU citizens. Diplomatic talk is sometimes too gentle, and it may delay some facts, however they cannot stop them. We need to be clear towards Turkey. Thank you.
Thank you. I would urge members to stick within their speaking time. Mr. Lisek, a minute and a half.
No, scusate, onorevole.
No, I beg your pardon, Mrs. Stassen, for the non-attached members.
Thank you, Madam President. President, as usual, the progress report on Turkey is a bit of a makeshift solution. It's clear that Turkey will never become a member of the European Union. It should never do so. The fact is that things are going particularly badly in the repressive state of Erdogan. Look at the police violence used during demonstrations, the corruption scandal within the government, the undermining of the rule of law, and severe restrictions of freedom of expression. In this context, it's no use the Commission and the Parliament going on in this naive way about improvement. I think that the accession talks should be stopped. The question is, why is the Commission not doing its duty? The Commission doesn't care about anything that stands in the way of its darling Turkish project. But we will keep on repeating this message until people listen. The Islamic repressive state of Turkey will never be a member of the EU, and the Dutch people who think in the same way as me will be voting for my party on the 25th of May.
Grazie, onorevole.
Thank you, Mr. Lisek, a minute and a half.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you, President. Minister, Commissioner, I speak here as a European and as a Polish citizen. Why do I mention being Polish? This year, Poland and Turkey are celebrating the 600th anniversary of establishing diplomatic relations. Polish-Turkish relations have always been very good. Turkey was the only country that refused to acknowledge the partitions of Poland in the 18th century, and during the Second World War it protected the Polish embassy against the Nazis. So we have a good history as far as Turkey is concerned. And here I'd like to urge Turkey to undertake the necessary actions to fulfill all the requirements of being a candidate country. As any candidate country, Turkey needs to fulfill all the conditions, the Copenhagen criteria. It needs to show that it respects all our European values: democracy, rule of law and human rights. That it finds essential to fight corruption. Turkey should focus on all the necessary reforms to accelerate the accession process, but in particular the reform of the judiciary. Thank you.
Grazie, onorevole.
Thank you. Mr. Howitt, a minute.
Thank you, President. I join others tonight by mourning the death today of Birkin Elvan, who was simply on his way to buy a loaf of bread and was killed by a tear gas canister from a police officer in relation to the Gezi Park protests, dying today, 15 years old, after being in a continuous coma ever since. Protests which Amnesty International say represent, I quote, the continuation of a long-standing pattern of human rights abuses. Turkey today is a country where democracy is under strain from government interference, corruption and crackdown on opposition organisations. More than 50 public sector workers were arrested last month simply for their membership of the KESK public sector trade union, and with the International Trade Union Confederation I condemn the misuse of anti-terrorist laws in this matter. I join others in sharing my deep concern about proposals to block access to YouTube and Facebook, which represent a serious threat to freedom of expression in the country. And most of all, the new law on the High Council of Judges and Prosecutors is blurring the lines of separation of power, giving the government, according to Human Rights Watch, greater control over the judiciary. Turkey can do better.
Grazie, onorevole.
Thank you, Mr. Duff. A minute and a half.
President, the crisis of the Turkish state grows, not least because of the extraordinary fissure which is now opening up between Prime Minister Erdogan and Fethullah Gulen. And I think, to be credible, this report of this Parliament must refer to that aspect of the crisis. Mr. Füle speaks of serious concerns, but I have to say with great regret that I think these concerns are now so serious that Turkey has ceased to fulfil sufficiently the Copenhagen criteria. And in the autumn, a new Commission and Parliament will be obliged to consider whether the protracted and frustrating accession process is plausible, and to reflect whether some alternative form of membership, short of full membership, will actually be a more suitable arrangement for both Turkey and the European Union. Thank you.
Grazie, onorevole.
Thank you, Mr. Belder, for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Madam President. On the 18th of April 2007, this was a black day for the Protestant community in Turkey, because on that day 5 young Turks were victims of three Christians were murdered by 5 unscrupulous, cruel individuals, and to this day the small Protestant Christian community in Turkey are in state of shock. This was because last week a new rule made it possible for the 5 murderers of these 3 defenseless Christians to be released from prison. So you can imagine that the Turkish Protestant Christian community is in shock, because during their trial those murderers made threats against family members of the victim, against their lawyers, against the media, and now they are at large. Protestants in Turkey fear for their safety, and I have an open letter from them here. So where is the rule of law in Turkey? This is why I have an urgent appeal to you, Commissioner, to raise this issue with the Turkish authorities. Ask for law to take its course. The public prosecutor actually asked for life sentences for these murderers, and they are now at large. I cannot understand that this could be allowed to happen. And as chairman of the Israel delegation, I would like to also raise the anti-Semitism in the Turkish media. Please raise this with the Turkish authorities. This is unacceptable, intolerable from a country that is a candidate for membership to the EU. We must not remain silent about this.
Onorevole Stadler.
Mr. Stadler, for 1 minute.
I would like to pick up where Mr. Belder left off. Some people have been talking about the murdered Belkin Elvan. I would like to talk about Telman Geskine. He is one of the 3 men that Mr. Belder was talking about a moment ago who were tortured for hours and then they cut their throats at the end of all that. It was a bestial crime and the murderers are still at large, haven't been caught. And this is the Turkey that Europe want to get into the European Union. Well done. This is the Turkey that is letting everything through. The situation has deteriorated since the last Turkey debate with the so-called justice law, the so-called internet law. Every year it just gets worse. They get away with everything. If this were to happen in Russia, there would be a storm of protest here. But when it's a case of Turkey, none of it plays any role because they are perceived to be under the yoke of economic and social interest. This is the morality of the European Union. It's a question of who does what. Turkey isn't part of Europe. It will never be part of Europe. And the Austrians in a referendum, if Turkey were to go any further, would reject their membership.
Grazie, onorevole Mila.
Thank you, Mr. McGann, for a minute and a half. Microphone, please. I'd like to congratulate Ria Oomen on her full and balanced report, as always, about the accession process for Turkey. It's a long and complex process, as has been said. Important reforms of a political and economic nature have already been made, and they'll have to carry on down the road of reforms and not move backwards. About the rule of law, independence of the courts, these are basic pillars of the architecture of a democracy in a European state. Turks need to be fully aware of these requirements at delicate times such as the present. I think we should study a favourable position on Ria's report, and I think you, Commissioner, too, should be thinking about opening chapters about fundamental rights and internal justice issues earlier. That way the Commission could follow more closely these fundamental issues. On the other hand, I think the revision agreement is a good thing. Because of Turkey's geographical position, it has a very important role to play in the migratory flows that reach the Union. Its cooperation is fundamental. Its visa policy towards third countries should be coordinated as closely as possible with the European Union, and I don't know if that's happening now. Ladies and gentlemen, the European Union is at a serious time in its neighbourhood, both southwards and eastwards. Look at the Arab Spring, the war in Syria, the situation in Ukraine. Turkey's geographical position and its links with Muslim countries should make it a leading ally with which the Union should be speaking intensively as part of its policy towards neighbourhood countries. Thank you.
Grazie, onorevole.
Thank you, Mrs. Koppa.
Today at 7 o'clock in the morning, on the day we are discussing the European future of Turkey, a 15-year-old boy died in a hospital in Istanbul. He was hit by tear gas at the Gezi Park events. He wasn't part of the demonstration. He was on his way to the baker. He spent 269 days in a coma. It's the 8th death that is connecting to the Gezi Park events, and as all other deaths, it will not be punished. The family blames the government for protecting the perpetrators, but there's been no reaction. Let us not forget the Gezi events here in Parliament. They were asking for accessibility, transparency, democracy. There's been no response to that. Human rights keep worsening, and Mr. Erdogan is under question because of corruption, which means that the repressive state is becoming constantly harsher. This tragic death of a young boy today makes us want to unite our voice, asking for democracy, more democracy in Turkey, and an end to police violence, not just in Turkey, but in the European Union and outside the European Union.
Thank you. The Earl of Dartmouth for 1 minute.
Thank you very much. Geographically, Turkey is 97% in Asia. However, the Turkish government's attitude to dissent places it 100% in the Middle East. There is, like in Cuba, a bill to curb internet freedom. The Justice Minister has powers to appoint and discipline judges and prosecutors. Worst of all, currently there are 40 journalists in prison in Turkey. Now, the Commissioner, in his arrogant self-absorption, said that he'd spoken to the Turks about this, and they're clearly not paying any attention to the Commissioner at all. In Turkey, there is a subjugation of the media, the judiciary and civil society that is almost without precedent in a seeming democracy. To put it simply, Turkey does not subscribe to Western values. Turkey should be regarded as too big, too poor, too different, too authoritarian ever to become a member of the European Union. And it is totally depressing that the establishment UK political parties are all cheerleaders for Turkey to join the EU. They and you should think again.
Grazie, onorevole.
Thank you, Mr. Stoyanov, for 1 minute.
Благодаря, госпожо председател. Какъв напредък, колеги?
Madam President, what progress, colleagues? Has Turkey recognized the Armenian genocide or the 5 centuries genocide in Bulgaria? Has Turkey made reparations for what happened in 1913? Has it released journalists? Has it ratified the readmission agreement? And now, on the positive front, has Turkey crushed protest movements? Yes, using the police. So what makes Erdogan any different from the rulers of Ukraine, previous rulers of Ukraine? Has Turkey done anything to put an end to the violence perpetrated against Christians? Negotiations with Turkey should be suspended immediately. No to Turkey as a member of the European Union.
Grazie, onorevole.
Thank you, Ms. Giannakou.
Thank you, sir. I heard the Commissioner and the Presidency very carefully. It is a fact that this report on the situation in Turkey contains quite a few points in favor of Turkey and some positive points. However, a lot of those things are now in contrast with reality. The fact that there is no political stability, as well as the comments surrounding the government's ethics, the troubles we have at the Gezi Park, the death of many people, the journalists that are in jail, the judiciary in general, things that are being questioned. Okay, let's suppose that all of those things are due to certain troubles and disturbances. However, there are issues that are exclusively due to the government. For example, recognizing all of the EU countries, recognizing the Ankara Protocol. All of those things mean being consistent with what Turkey is supposedly after. Other people that still think that Turkey wants to be within the EU, I don't think that anybody still believes in that. We suppose that Turkey wants to come into the EU the way it is right now, without changing anything. Now, this is a big political issue, and it will have to be decided on political terms. Of course, this effort to come closer to the EU helps Turkey to make things better, even on the surface. However, on the substance, the questions are still there as to whether Turkey really wants that or does anything in that direction.
Grazie.
Thank you. I call Mr. Sophocleos for 1 minute.
Turkey continues to imprison journalists, people of the press. It muzzles the media. It represses people on the street. People die because of the behavior of Erdogan. The young boy died, and these scandals are part of everyday life. It threatens the European Union. It's anti-European in its policy. It does not respect international legality, resolutions of the UN. It does not recognize the Republic of Cyprus. It does not help to settle the issue of Cyprus. The report is not balanced. It just records events. It does not showcase the big pending questions, and mostly it does not record any proposals that would make the country more democratic and would support the aspirations of the Turkish people. It is the time for Europe to react. We should not open chapters 15, 23 and 24. Finally, the moment has come to send the message that the European Union has a voice and can impose this voice.
Grazie. Onorevole.
Thank you. Mr. Binev for 1 minute.
Благодаря ви, госпожо председател, господин комисар.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Commissioner, Mr. Kukanas, colleagues, hundreds of thousands of citizens in Taksim and Cezis have declared there is no freedom in Turkey. Their rights have been violated and they're not allowed to meet. Their rights in the media have been curtailed as well. There is omnipresent corruption at the highest levels of power. The government limits the judiciary and trials don't run according to the law. The sovereignty of Bulgaria has also been infringed because of the Muslim minority of our country is subject to the neo-Ottoman strategy of Turkey. Turkey, which is trying to regain their Ottoman territories and politically and spiritually they think belong to Turkey, and I don't think Turkey belongs in the European Union until they have carried out thoroughgoing reforms of their judiciary and constitution. They need to pursue a proper good neighbourhood policy with Greece and Cyprus, etc.
Thank you. Mrs. Theocharous for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Commissioner, you asked us to believe the Turks. However, right now in Turkey what we have is a generalized revolt. It's on the news, on the television news. The presenters are wearing black clothes, and as we speak we have Turkish submarines and 2 Turkish frigates, Barbaros and another one, that are sailing around Cyprus. So I do not believe them. On the other hand, I was encouraged by what the Commissioner said in the past, that the Cyprus issue is the biggest obstacle on the way on Turkey's way towards Europe. However, you should know that the Cyprus issue is an issue of invasion and occupation. It's not a bilateral matter. What we expected from the European Parliament was that you would set a framework for the solution of the Cyprus issue, and this framework would be the European values, human rights, like the EPP did the other day in Dublin. Instead, my dear colleagues from the EPP, what you are proposing is a framework that can be interpreted any way anyone likes and is giving a free hand in Turkey to meddle in the Cypriot economy. This report is really has no contact with reality, and so does this discussion.
Thank you. Mrs. Boscourt for 1 minute.
Thank you, Chair. We, those who have been following developments in Turkey closely for years, have first heard that there was a serious threat to democracy in Turkey. Those responsible for making plans for a military coup had to be sentenced. We now hear that it was all a conspiracy. Suspects in the related cases are released. We welcome, of course, the release of journalists and others who had been detained for years. But those who are suspected of murdering members of the Council of State and Christian missionaries are also released. This is just one example. Friends and foes keep changing. It's unclear what to believe anymore. The truth seems to shift according to which newspaper one reads. The people of Turkey, to a big extent, are losing their belief in the rule of law and democracy, which are at the core values of the EU. Turkey should go back to the path of reforms and take all measures to restore trust in the independence of the judiciary and give back to the people of Turkey their belief in justice.
Grazie. Un minuto e...
Thank you. Now for a minute and a half, Mr. Stier.
Madam President, I would first of all like to congratulate our rapporteur for a very balanced report. Turkey is a very important country for the European Union, particularly for countries such as Croatia, because of its position, because it very much counts on the new peace architecture in that part of Europe, and Turkey is a key player. Turkey has shown herself to be that when it played a constructive role in the ending of the conflict in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and has continued to do so. But often we hear voices from the Turkish leadership that go in a different direction. You can sense that they want to spread their sphere of interest to the former Ottoman Empire, and you could hear what Mr. Erdogan was saying about his victory in the elections being just as important for Istanbul as for Sarajevo, Beirut and so on. And also he said that President Izetbegovic had left Bosnia to him as his legacy, as part of his heritage. This is not the kind of talk that we want to hear. We're not talking about old fiefdoms. We are talking about democracy. We don't want to go back to the Ottoman Empire. Turkey must accept European standards, and that is why I welcome the fact that Turkey is invited to align its policy towards Bosnia and Herzegovina with the policy pursued by the European Union. Thank you.
Grazie, onorevole.
Thank you for a minute and a half, Mr. Grzyb.
Thank you, President. Turkey is one of the biggest partners for the EU in the Middle East. Turkey is a member of NATO. For years, Turkey has been trying to accede to the European Union. The accession negotiations are ongoing. While they are ongoing, we can change many things, and that is why I'd like to emphasize today that in any issues like human rights, freedoms, there is a lot to be done. However, we need to be clear about some progress that has been done, especially when it comes to minorities. I'm not talking here only about the Kurdish minority, but I'm also talking about the Iraqi Kurds. However, concerns need to be raised about freedoms of expression, about journalists being imprisoned, violence against opposition. Without resolution in these matters, Turkey cannot even think of acceding to the European Union. The same goes for the resolution of the Cypriot crisis. We have heard some information about curbing the internet. Maybe the Prime Minister will withdraw from this attempt. I think that would be a step in the right direction. I believe we should talk, we should still engage in dialogue with Turkey. This is a very important partner for all of us, especially in these times of crisis, now with Ukraine. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you. I call Mr. Peter Lee for a minute and a half.
Gospa predsedujoča. Resnično bom obžaloval, če bo.
Thank you very much, Madam President. It would be a real pity if this were the last report from our colleague Ria Oomen-Ruijten about Turkey. We've got used to her standard of quality, and I'd like to thank her for her truthful and balanced report, which recognizes progress and at the same time expresses worries and criticism where necessary. I won't go into details, but I want to make a general assessment. This negotiation process is in a very complex background of political differences in Turkey as well as in the European Union. Given these differences, we can conclude that the process has led to reforms and has opened up debates which are necessary if there is to be a solution to Turkey's domestic problems. The democratic package is news, and I think at the same time that it's a pity that it doesn't say anything about the Alevis. The fifth justice package has recently been codified, and the action plan for the avoidance of the violations of the Human Rights Convention has also passed, and shortly I understand that we're to see visa liberalization. There are differences of views about how to deal with corruption and how conspiracy is to be defined. If we were to find an agreement here, then there would be still more progress to report.
Grazie, ora do la parola.
Now I'll give the floor to the speakers who have asked for it through the Catch the Eye procedure. Mrs. Korkola for 1 minute.
Kiitoksia. Arvoisa puhemies, saimme tänään kuulla, että Gezi-mielenosoitukset ovat vaatineet uuden uhrin.
Thank you very much. We have noted the latest victim, Mr. Elvan, 15 years old, has been killed after a very long time in a coma. It was a tear gas canister that struck him and caused his death. And we've got this progress report on Turkey by the Commission. And the Gezi demonstrations appear to have been just an interim stage. But we mustn't forget the victims of that. Prime Minister Erdogan made a statement in which he withdrew earlier promises, and his party has now got its back to the wall. Previously, I have spoken out about the abuse of power. In fact, I put this in a letter, but this has not received any further action.
Grazie, onorevole.
Thank you, Mr. Dangeau.
Madame la Présidente.
Madam President, I think this debate this evening is a bit surrealist. It's the hypocrite's ball, isn't it? Everything that has been said in the last hour has been criticism of the present situation in Turkey, the political situation, the legal situation, the scandals, the education system, respect for religious minorities. It's all bad. And what are we hearing proposed from the Commission and in the report? We're supposed to open up more chapters for negotiation. It's an illusion that opening up chapters of negotiation are going to have any fundamental influence on the state of affairs. That's a blind alley. We have to be much more demanding of Turkey, which is a major partner. But opening up negotiations is a reward to the Turkish government for going down the wrong road. So we hear that the Turks themselves are asking for Chapter 23 to be opened up, and therefore we ought to open it up. But we're not elected here by or for Turks. We're elected by and for the citizens of the Union, and I don't think they're that convinced by that idea.
Grazie, onorevole.
Thank you, Mrs. Ljubcheva.
Председател, господин комисар, дискутираме доклад, обхващащ очакванията на
In discussing this report, we are talking about the EU's expectations of Turkey, and I am extremely concerned to see that while in Brussels Turkey claims it respects principles of good neighbourship, nevertheless they send out messages that call into question the sovereignty of independent states. These are real facts. The report calls on Turkey to respect its commitments under international agreements, and this is something extremely important because Turkey continues to fail to respect its commitments to Bulgaria under the Ankara Accords concerning the compensation of Bulgarian refugees. Independently of the 2008 resolution adopted by this House, there's been no progress. The European people has to defend its rights, the rights of European citizens.
Thank
you, Mr. Pikula.
Turkey is a special partner of the European Union, and that is why I think that the negotiations should continue regardless of how long they will last. The situation of negotiations is correct because all countries have got the same requirement during the negotiations. 9 years after the negotiations is open, the results are very poor, which is a loss for the European Union and for Turkey. We should meet around those aspects that are of interest to both parties, be it energy, questions of security, trade, and so on and so forth. Currently, there are more than 500,000 refugees from Serbia in Turkey, and that is why Turkey deserves our interest. But we should also bear in mind the issue of Cyprus in order to try and avoid the isolation of Turkish Cypriots, and also we should facilitate the visa regime. Thank you.
Grazie, onorevole.
Thank you, Mrs. Papadopoulou.
You might try to beautify the role of Turkey, but events speak for themselves. Scandals, corruption, infringement of human rights, non-compliance with the Copenhagen criteria. This report is just prayers, no sanction. It tries to heap praise on Turkey, asking to open chapters without having Turkey implement the Ankara Protocol, without having signed the UNCLOS Treaty, and without having stopped the occupation of Cyprus. So we just push aside the threats by Turkey to Cyprus and the fact that the Turkish vessels are in our territorial waters. They have a Famagusta in their hands, and instead of implementing Resolution 550, they continue with illegal colonization, the infringement of human rights, and threatening the Republic of Cyprus. Turkey infringes international law, Commissioner Füle, yet it is not punished. This is an insult to the European acquis and all the principles that we should all be serving and subscribing to. Unfortunately, the European Union is sending gifts to Turkey rather than punish it for its behavior. I think it's high time we understood that.
Thank you, Mr. Arthabalvetia.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam. I want to stress something that strikes me as fundamental in the process of Turkey's integration to the Union. There's a point that's already in the text here, the Kurdish question. I don't think it's possible for Turkey to join if there is not first a democratic solution to the Kurdish conflict. Peace negotiations have woken up, have excited an immense degree of hope and attention among the people, which is why we must encourage this peace process between the government and the PKK. The PKK has to abandon arms and continue its struggle in a peaceful way, and the Turkish government must meet its commitments, reforms about the teaching in Kurdish language, and also recognition of all ethnic minorities in Turkey, recognition of Kurdish identity and that of other minorities, and the abolition of the electoral threshold.
Grazie, onorevole Tomasic.
Thank you, Mrs. Tomasic.
Čini mi se da će se još
Well, the debate about Turkey's place in the EU will continue for a long time, but its vague European future aside, the fact remains that the EU and Turkey must work in tandem. Turkey shares our external border. It is our worthy ally in NATO, and millions of Europeans of Turkish origin share the benefits and disadvantages of the EU. But I want to highlight another aspect. The ties between the EU and Turkey impose responsibility on both sides. And let me stress just one. Drug trafficking, particularly the heroin trade from Afghanistan. Croatia straddles the so-called Balkans route for drug smuggling, and Turkey is a vital element of this route. Although Turkey seizes large quantities of drugs every year, it is not enough. Additional efforts in this area should be a priority. We must neutralize this route, and this will be a great step forward in our fight against drugs. Thank you.
Thank you. That brings us to the end of the Catch the Eye procedure, so now I give the floor to Commissioner Füle.
Thank you, Madam President, honourable members, Presidency. On Turkey, I always have good concluding statements prepared, but I rarely use it because the debate always makes me think how to react in the best way to this wide spectrum of the views. So let me offer, as it is indeed going to be my last comments on Turkey report in this European Parliament and me in this position, let me offer you a more personal 3 points. The first one is there is only one way to become the European Union member state: to deliver fully on all chapters of the accession process. There is no derogation from the fundamental freedoms, rule of law, accountability, separation of powers. There are no interim periods. There is no shortcut which would ignore this value-based accession process, where conditionality is our main instrument. And what I have always expected from this House is to put the right question and help me to find the right answer. But you will not help me, you will not help my successor if you would keep saying that we should be more demanding on one side, but more restrictive as far as opening of accession negotiations. Because it is through those accession negotiations and opening the chapters where I could really answer the most relevant question. And I've heard it a couple of times before, not really today. And it is, do we want the European Union to continue to be a benchmark of the Turkish reforms or not? This is what the question is. Second, there is no other way to find a comprehensive settlement to the Cyprus issue than along the principles the European Union is based on. And I'm happy to see that also with the Turkish involvement we have been able to see the progress there. Just today, the two negotiators have met in the United Nations protected area, and they are going to continue the discussion on Friday, on 14 March. They have confirmed today that the leaders' meeting will take place on the 31st March 2014. And there is this third element. A young boy, 15 years old, died today, many of you have referred to, after over 260 days in the coma, having been hurt by tear gas canister shot by police during Gaza protest. It's extremely sad, but important reminder of Turkish people's aspirations. I have had those aspirations, and I will have those aspirations always as this leading light in my efforts. Thank you very much.
Grazie. La parola.
Thank you. Now I call Minister Kurkulas.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to thank the European Parliament for this very interesting discussion. What I think clearly demonstrates that it is very important to keep encouraging economic and political reforms in Turkey. This is the best way to go forward, and we should continue in that direction. Besides, as the EP's decision stresses, all sides have a lot to gain from the continuation of the reforms in Turkey. The Presidency, along with the Member States and the Commission, is making every effort. Turkey is an important partner of the EU, and progress in its rapprochement with the EU will be to everyone's interest. Of course, opening negotiation chapters is not an end in itself. It's the end of a long process, and Turkey knows very well what it has to do. Turkey has talked about it with the Council, with the Commission, on a bilateral level with the Member States. So, what has to happen is that the reforms have to take place. The reforms concerning the rule of law, the respect of fundamental rights, as well as compliance with their international obligations. Enlargement is an intergovernmental process, so progress is mainly dependent on Turkey, and we should never forget that in the case of Turkey, opening and closing chapters is also subject to the Council conclusions of December 11th, 2006. Summing up, I would like to remind everyone that the pace of the negotiations will be dependent on Turkey's ability and willingness to go on. And if we are to move on in that direction, reforms will have to be undertaken, as well as some very courageous political decisions on the side of Turkey. We will keep a close eye on developments. Finally, I would like to point out the importance of the European Parliament in the political process, which is the framework of our work. The will of the people of Turkey and the Member States are of a high importance in order to have the continuing support in this historical process between Turkey and the EU. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have received a proposal for a resolution to wind the debate up. The debate is now closed. The vote will take place tomorrow, Wednesday, the 12th of March, at midday.
Ora all'ordine del giorno